securitizing Bitcoin as an asset and creating different tranches of products allows people to get limited exposure, but still capture some portion of interest and some portion of yield.
Dividends, yeah.
Once we're able to get the technology to where we want it to be, people are going to be able to do that in a self-custodial way.
Alex, thank you so much for coming on the Bitcoin Rails podcast. This has also, I say this to everyone, but this one really has been coming a long time coming.
Yes.
We've been talking about this since like, I don't know, Denver or something, maybe?
No, or
Vegas?
Yeah, probably something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. So I'm super glad you're here. I'm excited to have this chat. Yeah. And what is your official title at Arkade?
I keep switching it up. Actually, I referred to myself as the Chief Coal Officer. Chief KOL officer. No, but I would say probably a head of growth or marketing, whatever you want to call it.
Okay, exactly. Something along those lines. You are very natural and intuitive with the KOLing, I will say.
Yes.
And I'm curious to actually get into a little bit about how that developed, how you came into that position. It was funny because I was under the impression I really saw you kind of coming into this character, let's say, when you were working at Bitcoin Magazine not too long ago.
Yeah.
And it was, Bitcoin season 2 vibes, and you were, trolling and
going against the grain.
Yeah,
my
you contrarian is your vibe.
To a fault.
I think wildly that is why you were successful, but this is separate. Maybe other people disagree, but I didn't realize that you had been in the space for some time before that. You got in when? When did you get into Bitcoin?
I got into Bitcoin in 2013.
Okay.
And it was for a while, a couple of years at least, a very lonely experience. Because I'm from Quebec in Canada. Back then, there was no, at least I didn't have the luck of, people who were in San Francisco or places like that.
Toronto? Are you far from Toronto?
I'm not too far from Toronto,
Okay.
and there was a bit of a Bitcoin community back then. But out in Quebec, up until the point where I met, I think in 2014, my friend Francis from Bull Bitcoin, who was doing his own thing in Montreal. Montreal is a couple hours away from Quebec.
Bull Bitcoin was around in 2013?
No, it was not. But Francis was running the Bitcoin embassy in Montreal, which was kind of like a physical space for people to get educated about Bitcoin. Eventually turned into a bit of an OTC desk as well, but was a kind of flagship, I would say one of the first major physical location for Bitcoin really all around the world. And it actually they're part of the reason why also, tidbit of interesting information is the first scaling Bitcoin conference
it was
in Montreal,
right?
And that was because in part of some of the organizers also kind of being involved with the Bitcoin embassy back then, and they kind of were able to facilitate this. So there was a point in time where the Greg Maxwell's and all of, because it was a small community back then and everyone really attended the conference. And so
I thought it was in Toronto because of the Peter Todd whole Toronto thing, but it wasn't. It was in Montreal.
It was in Montreal, okay. Exactly. And I think with Francis, we've always joked that if there was ever an opportunity to kind of nip Bitcoin in the bud or kill the project in one fell swoop, it would have been there in Montreal, where literally the only technical developer talent in all of the Bitcoin world were congregating.
You just bomb Montreal.
Well, bomb Montreal and you call it a day. Exactly. Exactly. So, yes. And in fact, this was kind of probably the beginning of my venture into somewhat of a Bitcoin career, because I was, from 2013 to 2014, 2015, kind of just started naturally gravitating towards Bitcoin social, I don't know if you call it social medias, but social forums.
Like Reddit and stuff?
So it was mostly Bitcoin Talk for a while,
okay.
And then eventually Reddit. And when the Scaling Bitcoin conference got organized, Themos, who's the founder of the Bitcoin Talk Forum, kind of like a very notorious figure in the Bitcoin community, someone who's completely absent nowadays. I really wonder even what would be what's happening with him, but that's a different topic. But he had a couple of tickets basically to offer to people at on the forum, and so I hit him up, and he was like, okay, well, you gotta like justify why I would give you the ticket. And I said, well, I'll cover the event, and I'll write kind of like a recap of a little recap of the event and the topics that were discussed.
And so you kind of pitched a marketing service a little bit.
Well, pretty much, exactly. And this is kind of like what played out. And then I really started kind of interacting. And funny enough, I mean, even before that, I was very kind of like very active and engaged on these forums, and pretty much with a little bit of the same vigor almost that I interact on social nowadays. And so I think a couple of the developers took notice of that, and so like the energy that I brought. And I think obviously I was definitely less wise than I am today with regards to perhaps technical topics and whatnot, but I clearly had a bigger interest. And so at that point, even back then, I had people like Greg Maxwell and even Adam Back kind of like side message me to kind of like clarify a couple of technical topics that I was engaging about, and kind of like really giving me a bit of a private education.
They were giving you feedback on your work.
Exactly. Wow. On I mean, I don't know that I'd call it work, but
on your writing.
Yeah, exactly. So that, and then so I got to meet them.
That's amazing.
I mean, I still to this day I just can't believe almost how I locked into this situation. But then I got to meet some of them in Montreal.
But this is early adopter advantage. I mean, because they were accessible back then.
Exactly.
That's my understanding.
Exactly. And it was kind of like easy also, I guess, to get noticed in a way. It's a small crowd.
Community.
Exactly. So yeah, Montreal, and then there was the second kind of like event in Milan that took place later on that year. Or was it early on the next year? I don't quite remember. That was the second event of the Scaling Bitcoin Conference Roadshow almost.
Right.
And then this is where I met for the first time, where I had a lengthy conversation with Adam Back, who, by that point we had sort of like interacted, and he asked me what I was doing at the time, and I told him all about some of the work some of the normie jobs that I was working on. And he said, well, like there's an opportunity for someone like you to maybe come in and help us out with communication stuff, right? Because, Blockstream had been founded maybe like 6 months or so before that point. Obviously, and the Blockstream was very unique in the sense that it was kind of like group of all of the giga brains in Bitcoin,
right?
But lacking a little bit on the sort of like PR communication department.
Still to this day.
Still to this day.
Exactly. Mean, come on. That's like the issue, in my opinion. I'm biased, but yeah.
Well, no, obviously. And then it also coincided with the beginning of the conversation, obviously, around scaling and SegWit, the soft fork, the block size debate. And they needed someone to kind of be able to interface, because you really were getting already to a point where, like, usually talented people, like, every single developer at Blockstream were on a daily basis having to interact with all sorts of people, normies on Reddit and whatever, and trying to correct, disinformation.
I'm amazed how often I meet developers who are misinformed, or like just like technical people who are actually building things who are misinformed, because the telephone communications game is not actually reliable or effective.
Exactly.
So yeah.
And so very quickly, like, that led me to basically being kind of like that, layman, kind of like translator in between the technical group and the community. And I started putting together.
Was anyone else notably doing that work, or not really?
I mean, back then, you would have a couple of OGs, I think, in the media space. I think of like Aaron Van Weerdum.
Love him. Yeah.
Was around back then. there was even Pete Rizzo almost around the same time.
Yeah, makes sense.
But Rizzo back then was kind of like what you would call a no-coiner, really.
Yeah.
He had a very skeptical, he was working at CoinDesk,
right.
But had a very skeptical take and positioning with regards to Bitcoin. But no, yeah, really that led me to, I ended up spending, I think, like three months or so in San Francisco, working in the same offices as all of the legends you can think about.
This
the
was
Peter
at
Woolies.
Blockstream?
This was
there was a San Francisco office.
There's two offices, actually. One in Union Square in San Francisco, downtown, and there was one in Mountain View.
So you went out to San Francisco to do comms for Blockstream in 2014.
Well, exactly. So
rad.
I was, I had to pinch myself every now and then because I would be sitting in rooms with.
That's crazy.
I keep name dropping, but it was literally like, the foundational developers of Bitcoin. And the idea was really, okay, well, since you're going to be sort of like speaking on our behalf in some way, like we need to infuse you with all of the knowledge that
they got right. That they got right.
I think this is where I developed a lot of the intuition and, having these guys as mentors, and especially people like Greg and people like Adam, who are, very, well, maybe less so Adam, and that's no slight to Adam, but I think he hasn't really been developing for a very long time. But Greg is formidable and perhaps unique developers because he has had the combination of having, unparalleled technical proficiency, but also a very high level, so like system thinker, like with the ability to kind of analyze different economic incentive dynamics, but also being able to communicate. And that's a rare skill.
Rare.
To have both. Yeah.
We were talking about this right before we started recording. I think that this is something that I'm only just starting to understand. I think a lot of non-technical people, for lack of a better term, do not understand, which is that, the ability to architect and understand systems and understand how these protocols and technologies work is not the same skill as coding and developing. I mean, if you think about some of the most kind of arguably like incredible creative, developers of technology or, technologists in the space, people like Paul Stork, even people like Brock, they're not devs. So it's pretty interesting.
And you see that even outside, I think, now that you bring that up, like I think you see that outside even of the Bitcoin space where like, the most celebrated technologists in any sort of like industry, think of the Elon Musk, of the Steve Jobs, are people that have they had engineering capacity to some respect, but their talent and the reason that they got there is not necessarily because they were the best engineers, because they were able to assemble teams of great engineers, to have a higher level thinking about the direction and the vision and the ability to bring people on board to that vision.
And it's very related, I think about like systems thinking. I mean, another way you could think about that, or I think a highly related skill would be just critical thinking,
Yes. Exactly.
And a lot of developers, that is not necessarily something that any old developer, I mean, you think about like the average engineer at Google, like may actually be quite low on the critical thinking skill, right? Like that's a soldier job. That is not a critical thinker job. And critical thinking is really where these sort of creative solutions come from.
Exactly. And I think that is part of what I've noticed throughout my journey working with engineers is, especially at the level, that I've had the chance to interact with with some of these people, is these are obviously people that for most of their lives have been like the smartest people in the room. And,
the engineers or the
engineers,
right.
And that it comes with some sense of ego that does not usually lend itself very well to kind of have this sort of introspection ability to check yourself and kind of like maybe admit fault or change direction or change course,
self-inquiry.
Yes, exactly. And unfortunately this leads to a lot of like some of the experiments that you're seeing playing out in this space where, someone will commit to a direction they've taken to a fault, despite every evidence, every market feedback evidence demonstrating that this is clearly not happening.
Yeah, I'd cut that down to it leads to wasting money is what it leads to.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay, so but you took time. So you have this Blockstream history, which is fascinating. And then, I mean, I know obviously eventually you went to Bitcoin Magazine, but there was many years in between. I mean,
big gap.
Yeah,
yes,
tell me.
Exactly. So, I pretty much left Blockstream right after the successful SegWit soft fork. So it was kind of like a jobs done.
Which was when this was.
That would have been towards the end of 2017.
Okay, right.
And so.
Okay.
And so basically
you left. You were like,
yeah.
did
So
it.
what it was a very intense, intense period, and being part of the Blockstream team and waving the Blockstream flag. I mean, I think most people nowadays that weren't around don't realize the level of kind of like antagonism that came with that, and like people
from the public.
Oh yeah, well I mean from like the other side of the block size war, and people like doxing some of my personal social media profiles, and really kind of like attacking. Oh yes, it was. I mean it was ugly. I got lucky in a way where it was mostly things that I could just choose to ignore, but there was instances of developers receiving almost kind of like death threats because of their involvement in this, and a lot of actual developers completely burning out from this. So still to this day there's a lot of PTSD around this entire event.
I hate to say that, but I think that we might be seeing part 2 of this.
I tend to agree with this, but I'm hopeful that Signal will prevail. I think it's not quite. I think the stakes for some of the people that are involved are, back then we were dealing with the Roger Veers and the Jihan, and people that had quite significant amount of weight in the community and quite a significant amount of capital also to deploy. I don't think the situation.
You wouldn't put Mechanic and Luke Jr. in that category?
I would not. I think I don't think they're as formidable of adversary. I mean, obviously it depends on your perspective, but
sure.
As far as I'm concerned, I don't think they're as formidable of adversary as a Gian or a Roger, for sure.
Okay.
So I kind of like decided to just pull back a little bit for personal reason, but also I was as well. I had just moved to another country. I moved to Asia at around the same time that I was doing that. So
for fun.
For fun, yes. For a new experience, and so kind of like building some roots back there, and that just led me towards this pretty long gap, kind of sabbatical, if you will, and up until kind of like post even post COVID, and even up until that would have been last year. So really up until that point I did a couple of like really stuff not really worth mentioning before Bitcoin Mag, but really then with Bitcoin Mag last year, the beginning of last year, if not the end of the year before, started chatting with my good buddy Mark Goodwin, who was the editor-in-chief back then.
Love him.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic guy. It's a shame that he's really kind of like pulled back a little bit, but I understand a lot of it. Anyways, started chatting with him, told him that I was trying to look for opportunities to get back into the space, but also get back into writing, because it's something that I had been doing a lot back then with Blockstream and all of that. I think this is something that I was well suited for, and this was also, as you mentioned, kind of like the early innings of like this Bitcoin season 2, kind of like fomenting almost with ordinals and whatnot.
He became editor. Mark Goodwin became editor basically right when ordinals launched. I mean, they almost overlapped.
Yeah, and it's funny because he had a bit of a relationship with Casey as well.
Well, we all lived in San Francisco together.
Exactly.
That's how I know Mark.
Right, exactly. So he told me about the intention that Bitcoin Mag had to hire some sort of like, research analyst, if you will, for all of the layer 2 stuff that was coming onto the scene. So we made that happen, and I did that.
So they recognized, like as a team, that they needed somebody to cover that vertical, because there was really no one on their writing team who had the expertise to cover that topic.
Yeah, I mean, there was Shinobi who already worked, but he had, Shinobi's quite technical.
But he's not a layer 2. He's not like, this was, the Bitcoin season 2 stuff was a different flavor.
Yeah, I think Shinobi certainly would not have had the appetite that I had, or the willingness to kind of like
go after those topics.
And like, go out into this kind of space, if you will.
Right.
I
think he's doing it now.
Whatnot.
I think now that you have left, I think he's probably doing it more.
To a certain extent, I think. but also Shinobi had a whole range of other responsibilities.
So many other shit to do.
Exactly. And even Rizzo was also at Bitcoin Mag at the same time as Mark, and they knew my profile from back then, so we made it happen.
Right. So it made sense.
Yeah, exactly. So
I think that there was an enormous amount of bullishness by that company at that time.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they were making investments in these L2s, UTXO management.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's also a perspective of, okay, let's get someone on board who also is able to kind of like decipher what's real and what's not, from that perspective.
Right. With the secondary benefit of also like promoting it, like promoting our company. Yeah, exactly. And writing and getting media out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So how was your experience at Bitcoin Magazine?
It was great.
Was it like the perfect re-entry point?
Absolutely. It was the perfect. I mean, it was the perfect entry point.
Yeah.
And that, like, not necessarily that this was an explicit intention of mine, but I also knew that this would allow me to connect with all of the builders in the space.
Yeah, perfect.
And engage with them. And, again, not that I intended to do that, but, it was inevitable that this would allow me to connect with a couple of the most interesting profiles and also give me a sense of, I was trying to get back in the industry, but I was certainly not willing to just do anything for kind of like, for monetary motivation or whatever. I wanted to find something that, I thought was something I could really lean into and put my entire energy with.
Yeah.
And eventually it led me to have a couple of conversations with Marco, our founder today at Ark Labs.
Oh, you're saying when you were at Bitcoin Magazine,
exactly.
You were kind of thinking about moving to a project. You had that on your heart of like moving to a project?
Like I said, it was not an explicit intention.
Okay.
But I eventually realized having and having literally people extending offers to me and being like, well, if ever you leave Bitcoin Mag, like there might be a role for you with us.
Yeah, that happens.
And that happens in any job, really,
right.
I think.
But when Marco brought it up, it was interesting to you.
Well, yeah, so I didn't really take it seriously up until the conversations with Marco, where then it became, well, I've been interested in Ark even before Marco decided to build a company around it.
Ark.
Yeah, I kind of latched onto it the moment
of
that
all your contrarian kind of critical takes, Ark was one that you were sort of bullish on.
Yeah, it was kind of like a unique approach, something that was really stood out, something that was a new combination of applications of techniques on Bitcoin, but without that something that did not seem just like us trying to reinvent on Bitcoin something that was happening elsewhere in whatever Ethereum,
it was completely like new,
completely novel. Exactly.
Maybe arguably a cousin of Lightning, but definitely not some sort of like the most of
Absolutely.
the L2s are these like execution bridge situations, and this was different.
It had a mix of a lot of different systems, but really arranged in a way that did not exist then. But even back then, like I did not have the understanding of the protocol that I have today. But I had a hunch, and this is kind of like what I think has led me to where I am today. It's just like intuition, like I said. It's like having the flair of like smelling the opportunities and the kind of like the direction that the ecosystem is moving towards.
Do you remember when you first like heard about Ark and kind of got that hunch?
I think it was just like when the original website was published by
okay, so you saw the original website
absolutely.
When it was first published.
Yeah, well, I mean, even during so that was even before I was at Bitcoin Mag, but even during these gap years, I was still keeping up and engaging on X, Twitter mostly with the ecosystem. That was my way to kind of keep tabs on what was happening. And I had seen this, and I had written kind of like a blog post around, okay, well, what could actually like a banking layer, like a financial layer be built, and using like Ark and Lightning as a kind of like a financial stack. And little did I know to what extent I would today try to manifest and be able to make that into a reality.
Now you're kind of really moving in that direction.
Exactly.
In a deep way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Interesting. But I was gonna say, like, so you would chalk up your initial interest in Ark as like kind of like a hunch, or like what was it about Ark that kind of made you think this is a little different?
Well, I mean, it was the approach that, because I had been aware of different sort of alternatives or kind of different methods, such as things like coin pools or kind of like any sort of like multi-party protocols, because, Lightning has this profile of a system that is, like a peer-to-peer. So it's like channels between two people, and then you connect them through a network. But the limitations of having only two people, it kind of like, it limits what you're able to do. It limits it to payment, essentially.
Yeah.
And so the Grail,
and even then it's problematic even for payments, because there's just
yes, exactly. I think it has also trade-offs as well. And even, there was a bit of a certainly even beyond myself, but from researchers, and like there was Christian Decker that had done research into multi-party Lightning channels. There's Antoine Riard and a couple of other people that were researching coin pools, and essentially the shared UTXO model and this ability to have multi-party interaction, which could potentially allow you to do much more flexible kind of systems. And I saw Ark as potentially being the first viable implementation of a system like this. We don't have to get into the details of it, but all the previous iterations had very, very severe kind of limitations that actually didn't make them practical in production.
Well, it's the only kind of system where you have the ability to, like, for lack of a better word, like pool Bitcoin with like permissionless exit also, if that makes sense.
Well, yes, but also like, the issue with something like coin pool, for example, is that to be able to execute transactions in between all of the parties in a coin pool in this shared UTXO model, you had to have everyone sign off on these transactions. Everyone within the set of the pool.
So it's not really permissionless exit then.
Well, no. So users had a unilateral exit path, but in terms of like executing transactions off chain within that system, every participant needed to sign off on it. Meaning that if I was offline today,
it breaks.
Like then it breaks. No one can do anything until I come back online.
Yeah, so it doesn't work.
Which is
work.
very impractical, right?
Yeah.
Whereas with Ark, has totally different properties, and it really just has this client server implementation that solves all of that problem, because every single user only needs to rely on the server being online, and the job of the server is to be online to facilitate these transactions. So it severely kind of like reduces the interactivity and liveness requirements of other participants, and makes the system just much more scalable. Because there is a scenario where a 5 people, 6 people coin pool, these are people that are running servers, perhaps, then maybe, it could work. But really, how much does it help in terms of like scaling to millions of people? So this is where really Ark comes in, and I thought was like, okay, like we have a shot at making this work.
So is that around the time, were they courting you, or were they basically like trying to get you to come over and do like, they didn't have a marketing person really at that point?
Not really. No, it was a small team, and this
was when, like a year ago.
This was literally a year ago. I think literally
they had just raised money and announced their raise.
Exactly.
Probably. Yeah.
Exactly. So I mean, one of my first initial talk with Marco was about me covering the raise.
Oh, really? Okay, makes
Ark
sense.
Labs,
no, but it makes sense.
For Bitcoin Mag. And so essentially, right around this time last year, I flew to Italy to meet with, because Marcos is from Italy.
Oh, wow!
So I flew to Italy to chat and kind of like talk about the vision and whatnot. And it was, me and Marco had known each other even before interacting in this professional capacity. We had kind of like known each other in the space for a while. I had a lot of respect for what he was trying to build on Liquid back then and whatnot. And I thought he had a very, even the team at Ark today is a collection of like very talented engineer. But again, circling back to what we were saying, is also a team of people that have had historically a very product oriented mindset, meaning that they were I've always been much more focused on like shipping things and executing and getting stuff out there for people to try and play with than kind of, getting nerd sniped.
Like navel gazing about the tech.
Yeah, exactly. And trying to like, conjure the most trustless and complex system to, in a research capacity.
And so you think that this is like a unique character set for the Arkade team? You think that the Arkade team is sort of uniquely product focused rather than just being like tech nerds who navel gaze about the tech all day?
Exactly. No, absolutely. And I think this has...
Why do you think that is? Do you think that has to do with just like their commercial background? Like, what is that? Is Tiero like that? Is it like
Tiero is certainly 100% kind of like leading the charge from that perspective. So the culture that he's installed throughout the years through their work, effectively,
it is distinctive relative to your primary competitor. Second,
I mean, I don't
not
know.
to comment,
Yeah,
but that's my observation.
Well, I don't know the entire makings of the entire second team, but I would say. Yeah, just, speaking only of like the way we've executed so far ever since, this meeting that I had with Marco and, kind of like projecting ourselves forward here, ever since because we were discussing in Amsterdam, for example, a couple of months after I met with Marco and I got on board, we were in Amsterdam at the Bitcoin conference and we set out to announce our partnership back then with Bolt's swap service, because our vision was, okay, how are we going to bring Ark to market? Is the first application is going to be providing a Lightning swap interface so that we allow Ark to become kind of like this platform for users to interface with Lightning without having to manage channels and things like that.
Right. Well, this is a key. I think this is a huge boon for Lightning. Right?
No, absolutely.
And Ark makes Lightning functional, arguably, right?
No, we completely agree. And again, we demonstrated that just a couple of weeks ago at the Baltic Honey Badger conference in Riga, where we executed on this vision that we laid out back in October last year, which was, we're going to make Bitcoin payment seamless. And we did that by, effectively kind of hacking an Arkade backend onto the POS point of sale system that the merchants were using. And so merchants were able to accept
server, BTC Pay server?
And yes, obviously everything was running onto BTC Pay server because Andrew, Mr. Cooks, who's our CTO now at Arkade, was previously CTO at BTC Pay server.
I did not know that. That's a good hire for you.
And so it was able to execute very quickly.
Makes sense.
Obviously it was a bit of a hack, in a way, and it's not quite ready yet to be distributed in production status.
It was a cool demo.
But it was an amazing demo because everyone was just paying with their Lightning wallet.
Right.
And you're talking about maybe, 10 different types of Lightning wallet from self-custodial to custodial.
Any of them.
But everything was going through Lightning, but on the back end, the merchants were receiving Arkade virtual UTXOs. And the main difference
non-custodially
here is, yes, this is all non-custodial, but more importantly, this completely abstracts the notion of channels, of liquidity away from these merchants, and therefore makes the entire experience completely seamless.
Right.
And complementing again, so it really complements Lightning, because this is also something that we wanted to kind of imprint in people's mind, is that Lightning and Ark work in symbiosis. And, because originally the original marketing and communication around Ark
was a competitor.
Was a competitor and almost kind of like was almost kind of being discussed as a replacement. And this,
which I have a question about, because I actually asked that question earlier to Steven as well, this complementary versus competitive. And is it true that does Ark kind of need Lightning? Like Lightning clearly needs Ark, right? Like that's sort of my point of view. But does Ark need Lightning?
I would say it does. It could absolutely function
because it connects the servers.
Well, yes,
because Lightning is how you connect servers.
Lightning is the interoperability glue for every single system.
This is right. This is what was pointed out.
From a fully custodial service to a side chain to potentially eventually roll-ups.
Okay.
And so
it's truly symbiotic in the sense that, like, in order for Ark, like, interoperability between servers to happen, you need Lightning channels, and Lightning obviously needs Ark so that, like, people can use it in a non-custodial way without, like, wanting to
being
die.
professionals.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So no, going back to what you were saying is, like, we built even a reference wallet implementation for Arkade, because it was not only a matter of developing the protocol and the implementation of the protocol, but it was a matter of, like, understanding how users were eventually going to use it in the real world.
Right.
And we felt like we would not be able to kind of like theorize about this without actually going out there and building a wallet for ourselves. And this has been so extremely instructive for us, because it allowed us to build even sort of like, to improve overall the protocol and Arkade, and make it so that we could anticipate all of the potential UX friction and have solutions for this. And so we're extremely excited to bring that to the market in the coming months, because we really think that, we have something that, as far as payment go, is going to completely be a step function, a complete change of paradigm with regards to what people have come to expect of self-custodial payment. But again, payments are also for us really just the beginning, the first inning.
Okay, so this is a key distinction, not to bring up second again, but I think it's interesting, right? There's these two implementations. You said payments are just the beginning. They're obviously very focused pretty much on payments exclusively, but you guys are kind of also exploring programmability as a feature of Arkade. I mean, would you say that is like the primary distinction in terms of, like, what you're doing with this protocol in comparison with your primary competitor second?
I mean, I would say so. For us, payment is just one of the application that you're able to, deploy using Arkade. And so we have a vision where, I think
payments is an application, and then you could have any number of infinite other applications.
Exactly. Because we like to model ourselves a little more around what has been playing out in, for example, the Ethereum ecosystem, where they have execution layers, right? So the second, the model for layer 2s that have been playing out in Ethereum look a lot more like Arkade than they look like Lightning, right?
Yeah, of
and
course.
So it was natural for us to gravitate towards a model like this and say, well, wait, hold on a minute. Like, now that we have this paradigm of pre-signed transaction, virtual UTXOs, like, there's no reason why we would be limited to only sending virtual UTXOs around. By nature of the virtual UTXOs, they support scripting just like Bitcoin supports scripting on chain. But scripting on chain is limited by, block time, by block size, and therefore it's very difficult to kind of like be able to deploy functional applications on the layer 1. Whereas if you have scripting off chain, then there's no more concerns of block time, latency, and things like that. In Arkade, everything happens with instant execution. And also, because you're not bound by the on-chain consensus, we can take Bitcoin script and kind of augment it by, being able to have access to all of the opcodes that people have been banging the table for in terms of soft fork. Well, we can just deploy them in our own sort of like what we call the virtual mempool, right? So there's a mempool in Bitcoin. What we do is we use, and in Bitcoin, you're using UTXOs in the mempool. In Arkade, we're using virtual UTXOs in the virtual mempool.
Right.
And then we're able to have all sorts of, Bitcoin script features that allows us to build the experiences that developers have come to expect from the other ecosystems.
And just for clarity, the concept of a virtual mempool is distinct to Arkade's implementation specifically, right? It's sort of this like additional layer where you have these other ability to basically verify these other opcodes, right?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. Like the virtual mempool is how we, it's a bit of marketing as well, but it's functionally for us this ability to describe the off-chain environment through which the Arkade transactions execute.
All right, guys, I want to take a quick break to thank you for watching and remind you to click the follow button on my profile if you want more Bitcoin technical deep dives like this. I also want to give a shout out to my partners for making the show possible. My leading partner, Best in Slot, just released the Programmability module for BRC20, making the execution of smart contracts possible for the protocol. I know that's been long awaited by the BRC20 community. Alongside this release, Best in Slot put out what is arguably the most sophisticated DEX for trading Bitcoin native assets called Coin Cooker, which I also highly recommend checking out if you want to dive into the BRC20 trading game and get started executing smart contracts on Bitcoin. I'd also like to thank Cetrea, building one of the leading implementations of a BitVN-style bridge for Bitcoin. Cetrea is building what I think could become the canonical Bitcoin rollup, enabling programmability, scaling. Really anything is possible with a trust minimized bridge, which is the unique value prop of these BitVM-style rollups on Bitcoin. Lastly, I'm thrilled to announce my newest partner, Spark, which is the leading state chains protocol on Bitcoin. State chains builds upon what was made possible by the Lightning Network for payments, but without the liquidity constraints and the UX challenges that often make self-custodial Lightning impractical. Spark is also led by one of the leading payments infrastructure teams on the planet, including founders from PayPal, Facebook. They're incredibly well positioned to turn Bitcoin into a true institutional standard for payment systems around the world, and I couldn't be more excited to support what they're up to. All right, on that note, let's get back to the show.
Ark itself fundamentally has this sort of off-chain execution context. Originally, it was referred to as out-of-round transactions, right?
Right.
So it's this notion.
Okay.
So it's this notion that instead of putting every transaction into an on-chain footprint, what's been called rounds,
which is how Second works, right? Because
not really.
Because I think Steven was saying, he was like, oh yeah, like we can't add additional opcodes. You can't add additional opcodes to what the level that we're working on. You need to there's like something that needs to happen, like some kind of like layer above is sort of roughly how he described it. But like essentially my understanding is like whatever's going on with Second, he did not seem to think that adding opcodes was even like an option, because you have the way that like that version of the Ark actually settles back into Bitcoin would prohibit it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the key distinction really, is like, if your intention is to always kind of preserve the ability to settle every interaction into an on-chain batch or an on-chain round,
you can't extend script.
No, exactly. You need to preserve vanilla Bitcoin script, because you need the transaction that's going to go on-chain to be able to be validated by the Bitcoin nodes.
You guys are able to extend script kind of outside of that and then basically like settle back late. Like how does that
exactly
work?
So the idea is that you're just, for example, participating in off-chain contracts. So, for example, if you're trying to do a swap with to say because we intend to have support for assets in Arkane.
Bitcoin native assets?
Bitcoin native asset, exactly. And so you have the ability to do swaps for assets. So there are different ways to do swaps. For example, if you're interacting with an AMM type construct that someone would build on Arkade, then obviously you can only do that transaction off chain, because the AMM, the liquidity pool that supports the AMM, is only enforced using off-chain opcodes, right? Using the advanced script capabilities of Arkade.
Right.
But yourself as a user, you can swap in and out of asset, and then once you've done that, you, depending on like if you're going back to Bitcoin or whatever, you can settle back to, the moment that you've executed a contract, then once that contract's been settled, then you have the opportunity to have vanilla Bitcoin again and to settle back into a chain. So it really depends on how people want to use the system.
Right.
Because I think even with Second's implementation, there is the notion that a lot of users are going to stay off-chain, are going to chain off-chain transactions, and maybe eventually they're going to include them into a batch. Because what you do when you're including your set of off-chain UTXOs or virtual UTXOs into a batch is you're finalizing the state of that transaction. You're making sure that the money that you've received cannot be effectively reorged anymore, right? Because there is this, what people have been referring to, this state chain trust model. When you're doing transactions off chain, when you're doing out of round transaction, there's a possibility that the operator, if he's malicious or gets compromised, might be able to collude with someone else that was in this transaction chain to kind of reorg or double span the transaction. And so depending on the exposure that you have to this, and this is a model that's, very similar or almost identical to something like Spark, for example, right? But what is, I think, the major difference between Spark and Ark and Arkade is that if you decide to not want that exposure to the operator, if you want to mitigate your risk, because, if it's only a couple of dollars.
With Spark, basically, that is like the one challenge with Spark is like there's no way to prove that this key has been
exactly, and therefore, by default, you always ultimately have a dependency on, the honesty of the operator. Right. Whereas, and the only way to kind of like remove that dependency is move your funds back on chain. But obviously, that is kind of counterintuitive to the purpose of these systems, which is that
we're trying to avoid that.
We're trying to avoid touching the chain because we assume that eventually it's going to be expensive.
Well, that's the scaling problem.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas with Arkade, if you want to remove the dependency on the operator, what you can do is you can finalize your set of transactions into a Bitcoin block, and you do that by joining an Arkade batch. And the moment that you do that, you get a fresh set of UTXOs, of off-chain UTXOs, and those have no history, and therefore they don't have a dependency on the operator. And that means
the output is basically like it's definitive, like it can't be fucked with.
Exactly. It's been finalized into the Bitcoin blockchain, and therefore it cannot be reorged anymore.
This, in my opinion, that for me was the unlock and understanding why Ark is permissionless in the first place, or like why unilateral exit exists with Ark in the first place. Is like, these outputs are basically being preset.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you mentioned Bitcoin native assets, programmability we've been talking about quite a bit.
Yeah.
These are like the kind of pretty significant design distinctions between you again and Second. Do you think that reflects also just like a cultural difference in terms of the teams and sort of what they're prioritizing commercially? Like, do you see that as a cultural...
I mean, I think it is a bit of a cultural difference. And this is something that is reflected, I think, in the wider Bitcoin community as a whole, meaning that there are factions that are solely concerned about the medium of exchange.
Payments is all they care about.
Payments is all they care about. And they really want to see Bitcoin kind of evolve into being this money, this
peer-to-peer money,
and really adhere very strongly. Whereas, there's another faction that sees Bitcoin having evolved already and having had a speculative period of, 10 plus years, and, creating now like $2 trillion in value, and wanting to deploy that value to be able to put it to work. Because I think one of the fundamental misunderstanding is that, yes, Bitcoin is a fantastic saving asset, but the fact of the matter is that large capital allocators and people that have a lot of capital, regardless of the fact that, Bitcoin is inflation resistant and therefore is more likely to gain value over time, no one really likes to sit on billions of dollars and leave it dormant.
And get nothing.
You want to have the opportunity, and unfortunately, this word yield has been tainted throughout.
Where does the yield come from?
Well, exactly, because it has been associated with all kinds of degeneracy,
shitcoinery, ICOs,
and rug pulls, and so there's very valid reason for people to be apprehensive of this narrative.
Yeah,
but again, ultimately.
But there is such a thing as like actual yield that comes from just interest that is
100%.
earned.
100%. And the best example of that is, Bitcoin-backed loans,
Totally.
right? Where like
best example.
Absolutely, exactly. And so someone that wants to be able to purchase something without having to sell their Bitcoin and is going to go to someone that's willing to give them, US, whether it's a stable coin or dollars in a bank account, and you're going to collateralize this loan with your Bitcoin, meaning you don't have to sell your Bitcoin. You don't have to incur a taxable event. And on the other side of that, the person who's making you that loan also obviously gets to charge interest.
Yeah.
And so everyone wins, and therefore you create a capital market, you create credit markets around Bitcoin. And, I think the next massive kind of demonstration of that we're seeing which is really kind of like the zeitgeist of the cycle, if you will, is the really Bitcoin capital markets with treasury companies.
Yeah.
Right? So what is Michael Saylor doing effectively is that now that he's got hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in Bitcoin collateral, he's able to create financial products, fixed income products that are able to provide investors with some sort of returns on
they're paying dividends.
Exactly. So the idea is, well, I have this superb collateral asset that, over time generally trends up, but there's a certain section of capital allocators that perhaps are not yet comfortable having access, really kind of like having full exposure to Bitcoin by buying Bitcoin, whether it's ETF or buying Bitcoin, in a self-custodial way. But they would like to participate or have the opportunity to capture, say, a fraction of the Bitcoin gains over time. And so what you can do as a financial engineer, which is really kind of like what, what Saylor is doing, is he's securitizing Bitcoin as an asset and creating different tranches of products that allows people to get limited exposure, but still capture some portion of interest and some portion of yield.
Dividends, yeah.
And he's been doing that extremely successfully. Obviously, now, there's a lot of conversation around perhaps the leverage that it creates in the system and whether or not other people are going to be as successful as he's been.
Right. Mismanaging leverage. And
exactly. I mean, everyone.
Shitcoin treasuries and all of it.
Yeah. I don't think, anyone that participates in this should be fully aware that, they're not getting the self-custodial guarantees that Bitcoin is providing, and certainly not,
right.
They're participating in
risks.
Exactly. But the interesting thing, though, is that this is all happening in traditional markets, right? And this is normal. This is always how things happen in Bitcoin, is things sort of like move faster within centralized system, right? So the first mover advantage of centralized system makes it so that it's easier to iterate on the next narrative and deploy products and services on the next narrative. Now, what we would like to see with Arkade eventually is like, well, there's no reason why we cannot also create what is effectively a form of synthetic asset or a financial product that is backed by Bitcoin collateral. But the amazing thing that we can do with Arkade is that we can allow the people that pledge collateral. So, Michael Saylor or the treasury companies, they're going to Michael Saylor maybe is buying off the market, but the large treasury companies today, a lot of them, they're going to Bitcoin whales, they're going to large Bitcoin investors, and they're telling them, if you pledge your Bitcoin to us, you're going to get a share of this company, and we're going to do, all kinds of shenanigans to make the share of that company go up, meaning that you're effectively going to get better returns than you would with simply Bitcoin.
Right.
Again, we don't really know how this is going to play
Risk
out.
Involved.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, there is a very, very valid set of financial products that you can create that are low risk and that would allow people to participate in these markets. But again, the appealing thing to us is once we're able to get the technology to where we want it to be, people are going to be able to do that in a self-custodial way, meaning they're going to be able to pledge their Bitcoin to a pool of capital in the same way that, Ethereum users are able to pledge their Ethereum to a pool of capital on-chain in an on-chain contract. And that contract is going to be used, that pool of capital is going to be used to create different instruments. And by creating these instruments, that pool of capital is going to earn a yield, and that yield is going to kick back to all of the original, people that pledge capital to it. And so there's there's all sorts of different ways you can do that. One of the things that interest us a lot, because Marco and the team before Ark and Arkade, working on the Liquid sidechain, had built and conceptualized a system called Fuji Money. And Fuji Money is effectively an implementation of, what Alpen has been calling like the Bitcoin dollar, or what was originally on Ethereum, kind of like this algorithmic stablecoin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you create a synthetic US dollar by collateralizing with Bitcoin.
Right.
And, obviously,
there's like that El Salvadoran company that also recently did that. I forget which one.
Well, there's Blink.
Right. Right.
Blink.
Right.
So Blink kind of does that. Yes. What they do is they use perpetual products on centralized exchange. So basically, it's all custodial, of course.
Okay.
But what they'll do is they
arb, right?
Exactly. You effectually creating like I think it's called like a delta neutral position, where effectively you're stabilizing the value of your Bitcoin, and therefore you're able to have, so it's not,
you're creating a synthetic dollar.
Exactly. Well, the difference is you're not really creating a synthetic dollar in the sense that it's not an asset that can be used to be sent around.
Right.
You're more so creating a synthetic balance.
Right. You're managing risk.
So you can
it's a risk adjust. It's
exactly.
Risk
so you can have
tool.
Exactly. So within your wallet, you can decide that you want a portion of your balance in Bitcoin to be pegged to the US dollar, and they'll do that for you in a custodial way. It's funny because there was the guys at a company, they used to be called 10-10-1, who were building a product like that was based off of DLCs on Lightning, and it was very complex, and it was hard to create a UX that was good enough to actually gain traction. But these guys, who are now building a product called Lend a Sat, which is again a DLC based Bitcoin backed loan products, are working with us on Arkade and trying to conceptualize, how the future of these systems could look like. Because yes, once you get past the hurdle of user experience, of developer experience, of the ability to have all the toolkit of contracts available to you, then you can create something that's feels seamless and is able to attract liquidity, because that's the key part, is how do you attract liquidity for these systems? And we think that you attract liquidity by removing counterparty risk, right? And counterparty...
Well, and also actually having applications that people want to use. I mean,
100%.
My most spicy take probably is that, while of course my heartstrings and my ideological part of myself that wants to keep Bitcoin permissionless for all is very committed to payments, at the end of the day, from a free market perspective, what I actually really want is to be able to take out loans against my Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think most people, gun to their head, actually really want. Where the money will ultimately go is into these lending products, assuming that they are trustless enough or trust minimized enough or whatever, or there's substantially reduced risk from where we are today.
Yeah.
That's what I think is actually going to get the TVL.
It's the biggest, it's the second biggest narrative of this cycle, I think.
After...
After,
are you
the
putting
treasury,
payment? Oh, the treasury
the treasury
companies.
companies. No, payment.
Payments
Payments. I mean, the game with payment is stable coin, actually.
Right.
Exactly.
Which that's useful for people who need to pay, who have payments as a real need.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a big meta. Also, probably
in the developing world and blah blah blah.
Yeah. But also, you're seeing now the new narrative, which I don't think is going to materialize in a way that makes any sense at all, is basically that every single company out there is going to have their own stable coin, right? So there's a lot of stable coin projects or companies that are getting
that makes
huge.
No sense to me at all.
Well, I don't think this is really practical either.
No, and why are they doing this? Why? Why?
I mean,
because they just want to have it's USDT on RGB, USDT on whatever. I feel like it's
well, I mean, the why is
Everyone
that
wants access.
they're looking at the balance sheet of Tether,
Right.
and the
They
amount of
all
money
want to
that,
be the new
and they
Tether.
want, yeah, exactly, they want a slice of that pie.
They all just want to like arb stable coins and take a
treasuries,
cut.
exactly.
Yeah, right. But that will die because there's clearly not a market for 8 billion different types of stable coins.
No.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Interesting. Oh my gosh. Okay. So it sounds like, is Tiero like, so this sort of culture of like moving in this direction you think comes from, is that like a Tiero?
I would say it's a me and it's a me and Tiero, and very long nights of
just being thoughtful.
Yeah, and just spending a lot of time. I think it's funny because we had an inkling that this was a direction that ultimately Ark was going to go into, like late last year.
Okay.
And I would say myself and him over the holidays last year went into full overdrive, and we're like, okay, no, like it's not something that is
just payment
in the future.
Right.
It's now.
Let's make the programmability happen now.
Exactly. And we were just lucky enough, I think, to also kind of with the Arkade branding and kind of like this very playful approach. It was also an opportunity for us because Ark, as being kind of like this neutral kind of open protocol that's not created by us, and that is not something where either of the teams that are working on Ark gets to unilaterally decide how you're going to bring that to market. Because again, this is a big distinction that is important to make, is Ark is not a sort of monolith network like Lightning is, meaning that there are going to be different flavors of Ark implementations of Ark servers. Yes, this is where again the analogy to rollups.
Right, because as long as you have Lightning interoperability, you can have lots of different Arks that can just still be interoperable.
Exactly. So we were already at a stage where we were like there's a lot of baggage.
So Arkade and second servers could communicate. I mean, it could, interoperate with Lightning. They'll all interoperate with Lightning.
Exactly. And what's important there is it's like, at least for us, what was important was like, well, there's a lot of baggage with Ark. There's a lot of misunderstanding around Ark, and we thought we had kind of
because of just like history and politics.
Exactly.
Yeah,
pretty much. And I think originally just like it was not a fully specced out kind of idea. It was more like a napkin idea,
right?
And it was kind of communicated in such a pompous, kind of like brash way, of
young kid, puts out a website.
Exactly. And with someone that already had friction with kind of like the
other founders.
No, but more so like
the community.
The community as a whole.
Oh, I didn't realize. Okay.
And so there was a bit of there was so
he was a controversial figure even before.
Absolutely. And so, what we decided
just because he would just like say shit on Twitter. Like, what was he? Was he just like a punk kid who would just like?
I mean, there was events of basically like there was one event, I think, which was the major, and I hate to bring that up, but it was the LND Lightning implementation had a bug at one point that would leave it open to pretty major vulnerability where Lightning nodes could be effectively, shut down, DDoSed by kind of like invoking that vulnerability, and that vulnerability ended up being triggered very intentionally to kind of like prove a point, which is like something that would have that affected, Lightning nodes.
Like instead of pointing out the vulnerability and getting them fixed, he actually attacked it.
Well, exactly. So that left a pretty bad taste.
That's not the best
in people's mouth.
Yeah.
And so this is what I'm talking about. So for us, Arkade was an opportunity to kind of like own our own narrative, not have to, go into like. Not that we don't explicitly want
your own brand,
but we want to control
narrative, your own story.
Exactly, and so this is where we took this And
it's funny, I'm noticing this. This is also happening arguably in the BitVM world and like some other like, you know, kind of protocol landia, like little planets, if you will, where there's like a protocol and multiple companies. Like I'm noticing there's this regular feeling of like, there's pros and cons to being associated with this particular protocol, but like more and more I'm noticing companies really wanting to be autonomous in their narrative and autonomous in their branding and really not be pigeonholed into whatever that BitVM or Ark or whatever the thing is.
No. And we think it's important. I think we wanted to also kind of like use it as a forcing function for anyone else that would eventually leverage the Ark protocol, because when you think about it, there's a conversation around Ark being kind of like this layer 2. But really, because there's different implementation, if you go on something like, you know, our friend Yannis's Bitcoin layers, if you look at the list, and eventually once we get to mainnet and, you know, Arkade is included there, like you would not have Ark as kind of like listed in the layer 2 list, because Ark in and of itself is just kind of like a technology, right? It's a set of technology used to build an
it's
implementation.
Not a layer 2.
Right, the layer 2 is
It's
Arkade.
An architecture.
Yeah, exactly. The layer 2 is Arkade. The layer 2 is second, right? Or however they
like
choose
Citria,
to...
like BitVM is not a layer 2.
Exactly. That's correct.
Yeah.
So we felt that was important, and you know, we also, you know, felt like beyond the focus on payments, like there was a world out there, an appetite for programmability, for toolkits that will allow people to really, you know, there's the Bitcoin-native terms that's been very prevalent and almost abused to a certain extent in the last couple of years. But we feel like what we're doing with Arkade is as close as you can get to, because at the end of the day, every Arkade transaction is a Bitcoin transaction.
Yeah.
Like structurally, you know, it's something that you can, it's a pre-signed transaction that you can use and actually broadcast on chain if you need
Bitcoin
it.
security maybe is another so buzzword you could use.
Well, yes, because you avoid the pitfalls of bridging.
Right.
You know,
you can actually claim Bitcoin security, which is, I think.
We think so, yes.
Yeah,
exactly. Or at least as close as can be.
As close as can be. Yeah, interesting. Wait, so just like a little bit of a callback history, because I'm curious. So when you were at Blockstream, like in those sort of like early, you know, kind of days of Bitcoin, in that era and that culture and that populace, was there discussion of, you know, making Bitcoin programmable, or like did people have a negative taste in that? This whole programmability conversation, what was that like back then? I mean,
there absolutely was much more than there is today. Obviously,
more closedness or more openness?
No, more openness.
There was.
So, you know, back in 2013, early 2013, I think there was kind of like a very seminal presentation by, you know, famed core developers at the core developer at the time, Mike Hearn. Mike Hearn, who got entangled in the whole block size conversation, but back then was a very high profile core developer. And Mike Hearn, to his credit, had he had a presentation in London where he highlighted the fact that Satoshi himself had envisioned different types of programmability features that could be enforced on chain, on Bitcoin, with Bitcoin script, with things like escrow, with things like, for example, Mike Hearn had devised a system called Lighthouse, which was basically a fundraising system where someone could effectively try to raise money for a certain project and set a target amount, and people would be able to pledge their money to that cause or that project, and if the amount was not reached, the money would get refunded.
It's a great use case,
and it's a great use case, and it's something that, you know, you wouldn't even think to build on Bitcoin today,
right?
And realistically, it should not be built on Bitcoin on chain, right? Because now we have a better appreciation of the limits and the costs and the sustainability of, but it doesn't mean that.
But if you could do it with Bitcoin security, if we're going to use that term on like a unilateral exit L2, that would be like perfect.
Exactly. And so, you know, this is also obviously, you know, where Blockstream, you know, the foundation of Blockstream and the sidechain project was this idea that we could use Bitcoin in more programmable ways without having to introduce counterparty risk.
What do you think happened? Do you think that it was just like sort of like, okay, then Ethereum and the ICO boomed happened, and then people had this sort of like allergy to that, and so programmability became kind of marred by its association with Ethereum and with these other ICO shitcoins? Like, why do you think programmability got such a bad rap at one point?
I mean, I think it's a bit of our fault in a way where we were not able to execute our own, flavor of programmability on Bitcoin. So, Blockstream really came out with very grandiose sort of projection of the future,
like with Liquid.
With sidechains. Liquid was not a thing when Blockstream was founded and announced. It came with the sidechain white paper,
right?
And like the entire Bitcoin industry kind of like latched onto this as saying like, this is
the future.
This is the future. And we have the most brilliant people on Bitcoin building it, right? And so at that point, it was like, yeah, this is like, we don't need Ethereum or anything like that.
But it never actuated.
And unfortunately, it was not necessarily only a fault of Blockstream, because legitimately, like the limitations of the Bitcoin protocol made it so that it is not possible to build something that is, trustless in a way that the original sidechain paper envisioned. But yes, then eventually Ethereum came onto the scene and the ICOs and all of that. And that definitely tainted all sort of programmability conversation that anyone could.
Like, who needs that stuff?
Well, exactly.
And
so like the prevailing view was really still around.
Just hodl.
Just hodl. Just hodl, that, the
hodl for your life. And if you got burned shitcoining, then you took that to heart, probably, and that became a motto.
Exactly. Exactly. And so I think, and then we like, I think the mind share of Bitcoin also became extremely committed to Lightning, right? As kind of like this future project, this scaling project.
Is good for the children.
It ate everything from Mindshare to Bitcoin Capital.
You have to be working on Lightning. There's no other project to work on.
Exactly. And so, that eventually...
Do you think that's changing?
Yeah.
In Maxi land, I mean, specifically?
I think it's slowly,
people are questioning.
People are internalizing the fact that, we need things
to work.
Need to support Lightning. And to also provide opportunities for people to deploy again their money. But it's hard because it's a bit of it's like a sunk cost and kind of like innovator dilemma, in the sense that there is a large set of early Bitcoin innovators, early Bitcoin investors that over-allocated to Lightning. And now for them to pivot and say like, well, BitVM is interesting or Ark is interesting is very difficult. Because
heavy pivot.
Because then it means that, like there's might be chance
you have to explain it to your investors.
They write off. Yeah, exactly. You have to explain it to investors. The investors themselves might have to write off a couple of checks that they made.
It's huge.
So it's slow. It moves slowly, but again, whether or not our perspective. And this is why also I think we're a bit of a unique theme in the space, is, with the context of the conversation.
You work with the Lightning.
Well, we also work with what we have available to us on Bitcoin today, right? So what I was going to bring up is the conversation around soft forks, right? And covenants and all of that. And, wanting to bring, there's a large set of people that are like, well, okay, if we want to build more programmable stuff and whatever, we need to change Bitcoin to make it fit this new paradigm. And obviously, like that's, it's not that we wouldn't welcome a soft fork to Bitcoin that
but you don't need it.
But we don't need it, and we think
that's like BitVM's entire claim to fame, right?
Yeah.
So like if you could like actually, and I think Ark is underestimated for that. I think that is like a powerful narrative. That I think that is the narrative of BitVM, in my opinion. That's the narrative that actually like made it a thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think people realize that Ark actually has that exact same value prop.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Arcade specifically, not Ark. Arcade.
Certainly, exactly. Well, which is kind of like my role is also like because
communicating
it's yes, because BitVM has a bit of a leg up in the sense that the architecture that it tries to enable is like a one-for-one replacement for Ethereum in the EVM.
Right, you can plug in anything.
The idea, yeah, right. The idea is like I'll build a bridge to a side chain or to a layer two, and that is going to run off of the EVM.
Right.
And so it's easy to go to, the wider Ethereum ecosystem and say like, hey, look, we found a way to trustlessly bridge Bitcoin to this type of execution layer. You can now build on Bitcoin. And so no one needs to reinvent the wheel in terms of like building another toolkit of, for developers. Everything is easily transferable. So, we've got a little more work to put in, but we think that, there are aspects of, we think there are aspects of Arkade beyond even the trust model that makes it a lot more advantageous for developers and serious application builders, because ultimately the major design difference with Arkade is that there's no blockchain. We're not creating another blockchain. Rollups.
You will, though, and this I found really interesting when we had dinner the other night. We were talking about this because my big question is like, okay, so let's talk about benefits of BitVM. Citria, I think probably Alpin, they're all going to have EVMs. They're going to have millions of developers who write Solidity, who just like immediately know how to use their shit, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you do that when your execution environment is Bitcoin script? And you were sort of explaining to me that kind of like part of the path for you in terms of ecosystem building is actually making the script accessible to people who don't know Bitcoin script. People don't write Bit. Can you explain a little bit how you're doing it? Because that is a huge thing in terms of just commercial viability from my point of view.
No, exactly. Well, so what we set out to do when we designed Arkade was say, well, it's not sufficient for Arkade to have additional opcodes, right?
Yeah,
because at the end of the day, the challenge with Bitcoin
because people don't write script. Yeah,
exactly. It's not something that is intuitive for like
anyone building dApps.
Well, no, even even beyond that is like where Ethereum was successful is they created programming language where a normal Web 2 developer could transfer over their skills to Ethereum and easily pick up the language and easily deploy.
That's why it worked.
Deploys application exactly, and so the motivation for us was to do something very similar, and there are precedent of different chains. For example, Bitcoin Cash has a thing called CashCrypt, and is effectively exactly what we're talking about, where they have abstracted Bitcoin script. With also, they, a Bitcoin Cash, they have a couple more features and opcodes and whatever.
Into libraries, into whatever.
Exactly. But also, more importantly, into a programming language where the syntax is a lot more familiar to these developers.
Java-esque.
Exactly. And therefore, we think that a modern development toolkit, which is what is expected from, the average Bitcoin, crypto developer, if you will, nowadays, is something that we have to. So we're actively researching and implementing in this direction,
right?
Because this is going to complete, I think, it's going to make it
makes it commercially viable.
Exactly,
in a totally different way.
and then once we've done that, the point that I was making is Arkade offers scaling opportunities that are effectively impossible to achieve on any sort of like blockchain based.
Because it's horizontal scaling. You can scale it infinitely.
Exactly. We can parallelize
You can have a
everything.
bajillion arcs.
Well, it's not even within a single Ark. Even within a single Ark server, the thing is we're not recreating a global state where, how do blockchain works? You need like the blockchain, and that blockchain needs to be replicated across a set of validators, and all of that large amount of data needs to be maintained by everyone and replicated. And so when you're talking about, high performance execution and whatnot, then it becomes, you kind of create a bit of a bottleneck in terms of performance, because you need to keep everyone synchronized with that massive set of data, and everyone needs. Whereas with Arkade, because it's UTXO based, so everything is local instead of global, we're able to do a system where every user is only concerned with their own set of data, and everything is able to be updated. There's no challenge in terms of updating things in a concurrent way, meaning that on Ethereum, every updates to the transaction set needs to happen in a sequential way, because otherwise different parts that are being updated at the same time could corrupt the global state.
Then you have double spend on that.
Well, it's
whatever that.
I don't know if it's double spend, but it's just like you're in for a world of pain, basically. Whereas with Arkade, we can have like updates to my set of UTXO. You don't need a sequencer, basically. We don't need a
That's the bottom
exactly.
line.
It's just co-signing transaction and updating the state of a certain UTXO. It's just like on Bitcoin.
You're just changing the inputs and outputs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Which really, like, we think ultimately when developers of because also our intention is to target the network effect of EVM and the ability for developers to transfer over their knowledge and existing applications is very powerful. But I think it is also, we're getting to a point where it has diminishing returns, in the sense that
if you can accomplish the same thing, right? Like if you can actually get, like, Web 2 developers are a much bigger market of developers to come over. And if you believe that Bitcoin is going up forever, they will eventually come on, right?
Yeah.
So basically what I'm hearing, and tell me if I'm getting this right, is like, okay, instead of like, Citria or whatever, they're just going to bring Solidity developers over. You're like, no, we're going to build effectively like a Bitcoin language that is equally easy for normie developers from Web 2 land to adopt.
But it's also like with
expressivity.
Yeah, but it's also like with the EVM Ethereum approach, you've almost exhausted the design space, right? In a way that it's like everything's been created. And therefore, if you're going to create a copy of an existing application that already exists in the Ethereum ecosystem, or the Ethereum chain, and it's layer 2, well, the only way you can compete is by having basically more liquidity than they have.
Yeah.
So that's a tall order for yourself as a developer on a small little niche Bitcoin sidechain, right? Whereas I think the opportunity that we have is, yes, we need to convince people that, we have a set of tools that are going to be useful to build these applications. But the cool thing is, it's a completely blue sky in terms of like opportunities to design new systems that have never existed before.
That we don't even know. We can't even see.
Exactly. And therefore, there's this notion of like when you create, when you introduce limitations, or when you introduce a new design space, yes, developers have to kind of force themselves to kind of be creative. But from that creativity are born a lot of times new things that, it's kind of like it's a thinking outside the box.
It's like the ordinals, Casey wrote more.
Exactly. You unlock a completely new paradigm of development. If the
design space is different, new products and new possibilities will emerge.
Exactly.
I do think, though, that there is something to be said for, like, even if you did just copy pasta Ethereum onto Bitcoin, like, I do think that there's going to be, if you can make it trustless, right? If you can solve these like core problems like bridging, unilateral exit, et cetera, if you can really create programmability on Bitcoin in a way that people can feel comfortable with, I do think there's that small market cap power, right? It's like, oh, there's a lot of room to grow here. Yeah. So I think that's powerful too.
Absolutely,
as well.
For sure.
This was so awesome. This was a really good one. Yeah, I'm so glad that you came on. Thank you so much. Is there any kind of like last words that you want to share about Arkade or anything else?
I mean, I would encourage everyone to check out what we're building, especially developers. We're going to be hitting mainnet.
When is this sort of like, what's like the roadmap in terms of this sort of potential like new language that you're developing, and like really having that developer tooling that will make it easy for people to just build on Arkade?
Yeah. I would say, so our focus right now is in deploying the fundamentals of the system, like kind of like the core protocol.
Right.
We're going to have Lightning Swap as well. But the moment that this is done, I would say that probably I would expect us by the end of the year to have a bit of a sandbox experimentation, probably a testnet server that is Arkade, but with additional, script possibilities, so people can start wrapping their head around how that would work.
Right.
And then, progressing.
And for you guys to collect feedback probably and see how people interact with it.
Because, like in a way you kind of like only get one shot at designing programming language. You look at Blockstream with Simplicity. It was a very, very long-winded effort because you kind of have to get it right.
Yeah.
Because if you start iterating and changing, like people are just going to be like, no, like, I'm just wasting my time here.
You can't train people and then change it. Yeah.
So yeah, there's certainly a lot of research work there for us to be able to do. So if there are people that are interested in contributing to that, please reach out to us, because we feel like, again, I think our talent has been on executing. And so, there's a lot of work to do, but we're very eager to kind of like, once we've installed the footings of the system, to really go into hyperdrive in terms of the programmability aspect. And, even with vanilla Bitcoin transaction, we can scale things like DLCs and Bitcoin loans and things like that without having to wait for Arkade, the Arkade script aspect that we mentioned.
I was going to say Lava plus Arkade could make like real stables, like real, or,
absolutely. I mean, this is something we're absolutely looking forward. I'm good friend with Shazan, and obviously right now, he's got a pretty big market, and he's, fortunately for him, also on-chain fees are dead low. So, there's no concern to have in terms of scaling at the moment, but eventually down the line.
DLCs plus Arkade basically opens up all of DeFi.
I think we think something like that is going to be very, very promising, and we have a couple of people working with us to make this happen.
In 12 months, we'll probably do like a whole episode about that.
I mean, I'm looking forward to it.
All right, cool. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.